El Fasher's Saudi maternity hospital, and the killing of clearly identified Sudanese Red Crescent volunteers in North Kordofan. If verified, such deliberate targeting of humanitarian personnel could constitute a grave violation of international humanitarian law. We urge the parties to cooperate fully with the UN and other humanitarian actors, lift movement restrictions, and provide security guarantees to allow unhindered access into and around El Fasher. Civilians must be able to leave the city safely and access life-saving aid without obstruction. We also call on the Sudanese armed forces to ensure the Adre border crossing remains open, to allow civilians safe passage and facilitate the delivery of humanitarian aid. Finally, there is no military solution to this conflict. Continued fighting will only deepen the crisis and prolong suffering. The RSF and SAF must halt the fighting, implement a humanitarian pause, and return to the political process. We urge all member states with influence over the parties to press for restraint and support efforts to bring them back to dialogue. The United Kingdom continues to support efforts by regional and international partners, including the Quad, to secure a ceasefire and advance a credible path towards peace. We urge all parties to engage constructively with these processes and prioritise the needs of the Sudanese people. The Council needs to send a strong and unified message that reflects our shared concern and resolve. And in this regard, I welcome agreement on the Council statement this morning. The suffering across Sudan must end. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom, and I give the floor to Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also want to thank today's briefers. Their testimonies confirm what we have all feared and what humanitarian voices have been warning us for almost 2 years. Yes, we were afraid that this was happening. What began as a siege over 500 days ago has become a massacre. Once a fragile haven for hundreds of thousands, El Fasher is now the epicenter of Sudan's agony. A city starved, silenced, and brutally assaulted, facing famine-like conditions, a collapsed health system, and no safe way out. I make 3 points. First, Slovenia strongly, in the strongest terms, condemns the reported atrocities committed by RSF in Al Fasher and Bara city. This is not the chaos of battle, but the deliberate targeting of life itself. Summary executions of civilians, people attacked solely for their ethnicity, and hospitals turned into killing grounds. The assault on the Saudi maternity hospital, where hundreds were reportedly killed, stands as a horrific symbol of this moral collapse. This is outrageous. We are witnessing a rerun of Darfur 2005. And we agree with briefers that a robust action is needed. The Security Council has to react decisively and firmly to these atrocities. Even in war, there are rules. International humanitarian law must be upheld by all and at all times. Civilians must be granted safe passage out of El Fasher, and humanitarian assistance must reach those whose survival now hangs by a thread. Second, this war is not self-sustaining. It is fueled from beyond Sudan's borders by the continuous flow of weapons, resources, and support. We urge, no, we demand from all states of this organization to refrain from any action that prolongs the violence and to uphold this Council's arms embargo. We call on states with direct influence, regional or international, to press for an immediate end to massacres in El Fasher, for cessation of hostilities, for safe and unhindered humanitarian access to all areas, including to Tavila, and to bring the parties to dialogue. Slovenia supports all meaningful efforts towards peace. We stand behind regional and international mediation efforts, including those led by AU and the Secretary General's personal envoy. We place renewed hope in Quad efforts. No military solution to this conflict. After more than 900 days of war, further delay is indefensible. Third, accountability cannot be an afterthought. There can be no peace without accountability, and no true ceasefire that ignores the crimes we are witnessing in El Fasher these days. The weaponization of starvation, the use of sexual violence as a tool of war, and the targeting of individuals based on ethnicity are deliberate crimes. Those who commit, those who command, and those who arm and enable such atrocities must face justice. Impunity has been the fuel of Sudan's agony. Justice must become its turning point. Mr. President, in conclusion, I wish to take a moment to pay tribute to Sudanese civil society and humanitarian responders. It is difficult to find words that capture the magnitude of their sacrifice. Where international actors have been denied access, local responders, including the emergency response rooms, have become the lifeline of countless communities. Many of those delivering aid in Sudan do so without recognition, without resources, and without protection. Too many have paid the ultimate price, even in recent days. We honor their memory. Their courage must not be met with silence, nor their sacrifice with indifference. Humanitarians must never be targets. I thank you.
I thank Slovenia for your statement, and I give the floor to France. Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I want to thank Assistant Secretary General Marta Pobi and Undersecretary General Tom Fletcher for their briefings, which alert us on the severe humanitarian crisis that Sudan is experiencing and that demand an urgent response from our Council. I think the El Fasher attack marks a new phase, particularly bloody one, in the conflict that is tearing Sudan apart since April 2023. It's of a long siege that has provoked a humanitarian catastrophe, which has been for over a year and a half. France condemns in the strongest terms the expansion and intensification of the offensive by the rapid support forces in El Fasher. It's urgent to protect civilians. Reports from Fasher make us remember the mass atrocities committed in Darfur 20 years ago. The reports speak of atrocities, in particular summary executions perpetrated by RSF in Al Fasher. We urge the RSF to guarantee the protection of civilians without any discrimination and to respect their obligations pursuant to international law, including international humanitarian law and international law of human rights, and respect Resolution 2736 and the Jeddah Declaration. France also calls on the Sudanese armed forces and their allies to demonstrate moderation and restraint in their response to spare the civilian population still trapped in El Fasher. The humanitarian catastrophe has reached its climax. France condemns, in the strongest terms, the strike against a Saudi hospital in El Fasher, with a toll of some 460 deaths, according to a preliminary assessment of the WHO. The perpetrators of these crimes must be held accountable, and the Security Council must consider new sanctions. It is up to the parties to the conflict to ensure a safe, rapid, and unhindered humanitarian access to all the populations in need, wherever they are, across borders and front lines. France regrets the decision taken by the Sudanese authorities, calling for the departure of the director of the country office and head of operations of the World Food Program. And we hail the action of the WFP in providing food assistance to the civilian population in Sudan, where famine continues to spread, where 25 million people are in a situation of acute food insecurity. We pay tribute to all humanitarian personnel deployed in Sudan. France calls for the respect and protection of humanitarian personnel, as well as journalists in Sudan, in conformity with international humanitarian law and resolutions 2222 and 2730 of the Council. France supports the efforts undertaken to achieve humanitarian truces, in particular through the action of the Quad for Sudan. Third point. The war in Sudan has a massive regional impact. Hundreds of thousands of refugees have sought refuge in Egypt and South Sudan, while arms flow is increasing across the borders. This is a severe regional crisis that threatens the entire region. Mr. President, the only way to put a lasting end to the suffering of the Sudanese people is to restore peace in the region, is to conclude a ceasefire, together with a peace process that is upheld by the parties. France calls, therefore, the parties to the conflict to immediately start negotiations in good faith, direct negotiations to this end. There will be no military solution to this conflict. In order to enable a ceasefire, all foreign actors must stop supplying the parties, both financially, logistically, or in military equipment. The arms embargo in Darfur, renewed unanimously last December, must be upheld. France supports all initiatives in favor of peace in Sudan, and in particular the work of the personal envoy of the Secretary General, as well as the efforts of the Quad, the African Union, and the European Union. We also recall our commitment to preserving the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Sudan. For months, France has been advocating for more decisive action by the Council. It is urgent to overcome the blockage and take concrete measures. The proposal of the Secretary General in terms of protection of civilians must be implemented. Humanitarian truces must be concluded. Measures must be taken to uphold the arms embargo and to stop foreign interference. It's up to the Council to support international efforts so that perpetrators of crimes are held accountable, because impunity cannot be tolerated. Lastly, this Council must be more involved to allow for an immediate ceasefire throughout Sudan. Thank you very much. I thank the representative of France for his statement, and I now give the floor to the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank USG Fletcher and ASG Poby for their sobering briefings. Our worst fears have materialized. The RSF has captured El Fasher, and the heightened risk of a civilian massacre is now unfolding. The Security Council swiftly delivered a clear and unified message focusing on the situation in El Fasher. But words alone are not enough. We must work together a stronger Security Council resolution containing concrete measures that reinforce the protection of civilians, facilitate humanitarian access, and bring real change on the ground. I will make 3 points today. First, we condemn in the strongest possible terms the RSF's continued assault on El Fasher, despite this Council's demand in Resolution 2736 that the RSF halt the siege of El Fasher and cease the fighting immediately. Throughout the siege from early last year, the RSF has targeted hospitals, IDP camps, and religious facilities with artillery and drone strikes. We condemn not only these assaults, but also the reported atrocities perpetrated by the RSF against civilians, including summary executions and arbitrary detention. Civilians, particularly women and children, are suffering not only from these attacks and atrocities, but also from severe deprivation caused by the siege and blockade humanitarian aid. We urge RSF to immediately cease its assault on El Fasher, withdraw from the city, and engage without delay in negotiation toward a humanitarian ceasefire. We also call on all external actors to cease any support that enables the RSF to continue attacks in and around El Fasher. We also call upon all parties to the conflict, particularly RSF, to facilitate immediate and unfettered humanitarian access and ensure the protection of civilians, including providing safe passage in accordance with international law. Second, all violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law must be addressed through robust accountability measures. Given the gravity of these violations and the ICC's jurisdiction, we emphasize the imperative need for accountability, including through international mechanisms. We see value in the recommendation of the independent international fact-finding mission to expand ICC jurisdiction and establish an independent, impartial judicial mechanism for Sudan. We welcome ICC's first conviction on October for crimes against humanity and war crimes committed in Darfur. It sends a clear message. There will be no impunity for perpetrators. We call upon all parties to the conflict to fully cooperate with the international community in pursuing accountability for remaining wanted individuals and those responsible for violations of international law. Third, while responding to the urgent situation in El Fasher, we must not lose sight of the broad peace process in Sudan. In this regard, we support the commitment of regional and international actors as expressed in the joint statement by Quad adopted last September. We fully recognize that a Sudanese-owned political transition is essential. However, given Sudan's complex political landscape, regional and international partners must remain engaged in restoring and sustaining peace. The roadmap announced in the Sudan Quad statement, calling for a humanitarian truce leading to a permanent ceasefire and a 9-month transition to a civilian-led government, represent a critical step forward. The Security Council should support and build on this initiative. Let me repeat again that sustainable peace across Sudan can only be achieved through a negotiated settlement. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea, and I give the floor to Panama. Thank you, Madam President. Allow me to begin by expressing our gratitude to Madam Marta Pobe and Mr. Tom Fletcher for their valuable briefings. They have described in those briefings very clearly the tragic situation in Sudan and its continued deterioration. We also recognize and appreciate the presence of the permanent representative of Sudan and the United Arab Emirates in this meeting. They distinguish us with their presence. Panama would like to express its profound solidarity with the people of Sudan, as well as our most profound consternation in the face of the devastating situation experienced by the population of El Fasher in North Darfur. Preliminary reports confirm what Martha Pobe and Tom Fletcher told us, and they are shattering. The violence unleashed by the Rapid Support Forces against civilians has reached levels of cruelty that are unbearable. The intense bombing since the 26th of October has cost the lives of at least 2,000 people, including journalists and humanitarian personnel that were helping the victims. Panama condemns, in the strongest terms, a systematic and deliberate massacre of the civilian population, attacks against patients in hospitals, against people in markets and refugee camps, as well as persistent sexual and gender violence. Entire families have been killed, entire communities swept away, and thousands of people are living in fear, experiencing famine and despair. This is not a war between armies. This is a war against civilians. Nothing can justify such barbarity. These acts constitute atrocities that cannot be, nor should they remain unpunished. Panama notes with alarm the systematic pattern of ethnically motivated killings, of sexual and gender violence that are being documented in this conflict as instruments to sow terror on entire communities. These attacks demonstrate an absolute contempt for the most basic norms of international humanitarian law and of civilization. These atrocities are part of a conscious strategy to destroy and uproot entire communities. Panama joins the urgent appeal of the international community for a total, immediate, and unconditional ceasefire. At the same time, we urge all external actors to stop their interference and to stop any support that serves to arm or any kind or boost the capacity for violence and boost atrocities. We demand the immediate opening of humanitarian corridors to allow for this safe, immediate, and dignified evacuation of people trying to escape this horror, as well as unrestricted access to humanitarian assistance. Mr. President, there can be no peace without justice. This is why Panama demands that effective mechanisms of justice and accountability be set up against all the perpetrators and those who allow acts of genocide and war crimes to take place. Panama recognizes and expresses gratitude for the work of the International Independent Fact-Finding Mission on Sudan. The most recent report of the mission clearly describes what we are witnessing: a war of atrocities directed mainly against the civilian population. The work of the mission, which deserves particular gratitude, is essential so that the truth is known and so that victims are heard. Also, Panama would like to highlight the recent visit of the Security Council to Addis Ababa, where a constructive dialogue was held with the Peace and Security Council of the African Union on the situation in Sudan. This spirit of regional and international cooperation is essential to respond in a coherent fashion and urgently to the magnitude of this crisis. We want to make an appeal to the protagonists of this conflict to immediately stop this massacre and to comply with their responsibility to protect the civilian population and establish secure conditions in Sudan. Panama once again expresses its solidarity with the Sudanese people and speaks out in defense of life, of human dignity, and the principles of international humanitarian law. Thank you very much. I thank the representative of Panama for your statement, and I give the floor to Pakistan.
President, thank you for convening this urgent meeting. We are thankful also to Assistant Secretary General Pobi and Under Secretary General Fletcher for their sobering and deeply distressing briefings. The situation in Darfur has continued to deteriorate sharply, and this despite Security Council Resolution 2736, which demanded that the rapid support forces lift the siege of Al-Fashir, and despite repeated Council press statements calling for an end to the atrocities. The RSF has taken over Al-Fashir and continues to commit one war crime after another. So when ASG Pobi underlines that decisive action was not taken, and when USG Fletcher keeps telling us that we always saw it coming, there is little to justify why we could not do enough to prevent this. It is time for this Council to send an unambiguous message that it will not remain a passive spectator while innocent civilians are massacred, hospitals are bombed, and aid workers are targeted with impunity. Pakistan condemns in the strongest possible terms the atrocities perpetrated by the RSF and its violent takeover of Al-Fashir. The deliberate targeting of civilians, medical facilities, and humanitarian personnel constitutes flagrant violation of international humanitarian and human rights law. We are appalled by the killing of hundreds of patients and health workers at the Saudi maternity hospital and by the continuing siege that has trapped thousands of civilians in inhumane conditions. These heinous acts must stop immediately, and the perpetrators and their sponsors must be held accountable. President, for over 2 decades, we have witnessed a tragedy unfolding in Sudan, and that has been complicated by external interference and geopolitics. And unfortunately, we have not learned from history and past mistakes. And those who reject parallel governance by the RSF, but at the same time try to equate the militia with the Sudanese authorities, must review their positions. The perceived lack of full support for the Sudanese government by this Council only emboldens the RSF and prolongs the conflict. Undermining Sudan's legitimate state institutions risks creating a vacuum that armed groups like RSF exploit to commit further atrocities and destabilize the entire region. It is therefore imperative that the international community engage constructively with the Sudanese authorities to sustain governance, facilitate humanitarian access, advance the political process, and preserve national unity. We recognize the steps taken by the Sudanese government in pursuance of its transitional roadmap, including the appointment of a new prime minister and a technocratic cabinet tasked with alleviating humanitarian suffering and advancing an inclusive political transition. These are positive developments that deserve the Council's acknowledgement and support. President, Pakistan reaffirms its unwavering commitment to the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of Sudan. We condemn unequivocally the establishment of any so-called parallel governance structures which undermine Sudan's state institutions and risk fragmenting the country. Such illegitimate structures must find no recognition from the international community. And as others have said, there is no military solution to this conflict. The guns must fall silent. External interference must stop. We call for an immediate cessation of hostilities and for renewed engagement in a genuinely Sudanese-led and Sudanese-owned political process, consistent with the spirit of the Jeddah Declaration and commitments to protect the civilians in Sudan. Pakistan will support all efforts, good faith, coordinated, and synergized efforts towards this end. The people of Sudan have endured unimaginable suffering for far too long. They deserve peace, dignity, and hope. The Council must act with unity and resolve to bring about a ceasefire, to protect civilians, and to give the people of Sudan the chance to rebuild their country in peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
President, I thank ASG Poby and USG Fletcher for their briefings, which are deeply thought-provoking. I also welcome the permanent representatives of Sudan and UAE to today's meeting. Recently in Sudan, the RSF attacked and seized Al Fasher, resulting in the sharp deterioration of the situation on the ground. This escalating conflict has reportedly left over 100,000 civilians trapped in the city and led to massive displacement and frequent violent attacks. China expresses grave concern over this situation. I will make 3 points. First, achieving a ceasefire to halt the fighting and end the violence is the overwhelming urgent priority. Council Resolution 2736 explicitly demands that the RSF and their siege of Al Fasher and calls on all parties to the conflict to immediately cease hostilities and ensure protection of civilians. The collective will of the Council must not be disregarded, and humanitarian disasters should not be allowed to recur. China strongly condemns the RSF's atrocities of attacking civilians and destroying civilian infrastructure such as hospitals. We demand that the RSF immediately cease all its violent acts and refrain from crossing the red line of IHL. We call on all parties to the conflict to prioritize the interests of the country and the people, heed the resounding appeals of the international community, strictly comply with relevant Council resolutions, and immediately and unconditionally cease all hostilities. External interferences must stop, and all measures must be taken to protect civilians. Second, scaling up humanitarian assistance is an important step for salvaging this dangerous situation. China urges the RSF to immediately lift restrictions on humanitarian access to Al Fasher, ensure the safe delivery and timely, orderly distribution of aid supplies, guarantee safe passage for civilians wishing to evacuate voluntarily, and ensure the safety and security of humanitarian workers. The Sudanese government should work closely with UN's humanitarian agencies and strengthen coordination with all relevant parties on the ground to ensure the supply of essential items for survival, including food, drinking water, and medicine, and make every effort to alleviate the humanitarian crisis. Currently, both the Sudan Humanitarian Response Plan and the Regional Refugee Response Plan are underfunded. The international community, especially traditional donors and new partners, should increase rather than reduce their contributions, and pledged contributions should be disbursed as soon as possible. Third, promoting dialogue and negotiation is the only way to resolve the conflict. China welcomes the emergency meeting convened by the AU Peace and Security Council and the communique issued with support SG's personal envoy La Marmora in strengthening coordination with regional organizations like the AU to make concerted good offices and mediation efforts so as to find African solutions to African issues. We urge all parties to the conflict to return to the right track of political dialogue at an early date. China firmly supports Sudan's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity. We support the Sudanese government's efforts to safeguard national security and advance the political process. And we support Sudan in finding a solution well suited to its national realities and the needs of its people. We oppose the creation of any parallel governance structures and other actions that could lead to division. We oppose any interference, any exerting of pressure or provocation of problems that could exacerbate the conflict, and we're against the imposition of any external solutions. President, at this critical juncture in the Sudanese situation, China welcomes the Council issuing a press statement on the situation in El Fasher, which sends a timely and clear message. Facts have proven that ceasefires do not materialize automatically, nor does peace arrive on its own. The international community must accelerate efforts to build a shared vision for peace, intensify concerted mediation efforts, and increase humanitarian support. This will enable the Sudanese people to be spared of the torment of war, embrace the dawn of peace, and return to peaceful lives at an early date. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank Assistant Secretary General Martha Poby and Under Secretary General Tom Fletcher for their briefings today. The situation they have painted cannot let us and should not let us indifferent. Mr. President, Greece expresses its grave concern over the persistent military escalation in El Fasher, which for more than 18 months has been the epicenter of fighting and unimaginable human suffering. The Rapid Support Forces siege has trapped hundreds of thousands of civilians to the mercy of their attackers without any possibility of protection, let alone humanitarian aid. We strongly condemn the attack of RSF on El Fasher and call for the immediate halt to all hostilities and for the de-escalation in and around El Fasher. Reports of indiscriminate shelling, ethnically motivated executions, the massacre of the Saudi maternity hospital, and gender-based violence by all sides are to be strongly condemned. These acts, documented by the UN and the African Union, constitute serious violations of international humanitarian and human rights law, some amounting to war crimes. Greece fully aligns itself with the Secretary General's recent statement regarding the situation in El Fasher and shares his concern about the appalling humanitarian toll. We echo his call for an immediate end to the siege, cessation of hostilities, and unimpeded humanitarian access to all civilians in need. We call for safe passage for all those trying to leave El Fasher, including vulnerable groups like women, children, and the elderly. Mr. President, allow me to highlight 2 points. First, the humanitarian situation in El Fasher has turned into the gravest crisis in Sudan. Over 10 million people are now displaced in Sudan, while famine and disease threaten those trapped in besieged areas such as El Fasher. Greece reiterates the Secretary General's call for safe and rapid delivery of aid and for full respect of international humanitarian law. We strongly support the creation of safe humanitarian corridors under UN and AU coordination in line with the Security Council Resolution 2719. Let me stress that the children are among the most severely affected, as the Under-Secretary General has just described. We demand that all parties refrain from prevent and put an end to any violations against women and children, including recruitment and use, killing and maiming, raping, and other forms of sexual violence. Greece urges all parties to place the protection of civilians at the heart of peace efforts and calls for perpetrators of violations against civilians to be held accountable. Second, accountability is essential for all those responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The UN fact-finding mission has confirmed a consistent pattern of atrocities by all parties: summary executions, sexual violence, forced displacement, and deliberate starvation. Impunity remains a driving force behind Sudan's recurring violence. While domestic judicial initiatives are welcome, they remain insufficient and selective. Greece therefore supports complementary international mechanisms capable of ensuring impartial investigations and prosecutions. Mr. President, on the political track, the crisis in Sudan, apart from being a horrifying tragedy, threatens regional stability, including the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, and the Red Sea region, with repercussions we all imagine. We call on all third actors to halt the transfer of weapons and fighters into Sudan and to support the coordinated diplomatic framework of the UN, AU, and IGAD, and the League of Arab States. Only concerted international engagement can prevent further fragmentation of the country. Greece reaffirms its strong support for Sudan's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity. We reiterate there is no military solution to this conflict. We urge both the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces to engage without preconditions with the Secretary General's personal envoy, Mr. Lamamra, and to take immediate concrete steps toward a negotiated and lasting ceasefire leading to a credible political process and sustainable peace. Finally, this Council should not refrain from taking further action as necessary and rise to the demands of this crisis. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Assistant Secretary General Martha Pobe and Undersecretary General Tom Fletcher, for your sobering briefings today. The United States condemns in the strongest terms the horrific violence occurring in El Fasher. The situation is both tragic and appalling. We have said this before, and we will say it again. The Rapid Support Forces and allied militias have committed genocide. The RSF has and continues to systematically kill men and boys, even infants, and deliberately target women and children for rape and other forms of brutal sexual violence. These crimes are ethnically motivated. RSF militias are targeting civilians as they flee, killing innocent people escaping conflict, and preventing those who remain from accessing life-saving supplies. The United States condemns these abhorrent atrocities in no uncertain terms. Those responsible should be held accountable, including through sanctions, as noted by the Sudan Sanctions Panel of Experts in its most recent report. The 1591 sanctions regime was established to help bring peace to Darfur, and it is high time the Council update the Sudan sanctions list. The Council must use all tools at its disposal to facilitate peace. The United States calls on Sudan's warring parties to cease hostilities, allow unhindered humanitarian access to all parts of the country, and protect civilians. It is not enough for the RSF to make humanitarian commitments. They must implement them. Mr. President, we also condemn the Sudanese Armed Forces' recent expulsion of World Food Program staff. Colleagues, ending wars is a priority for President Trump, and the United States remains committed to working with our partners and other stakeholders to resolve the crisis. Together, we are focused on securing an immediate humanitarian truce, halting external support, and advancing a transition to civilian governance. A civilian-led post-conflict governance process is necessary to counter violent extremists, prevent the spread of conflict, and foster meaningful negotiations among the parties in Sudan. Sudan's future governance is for the Sudanese people to decide through a neutral, inclusive, and transparent transition process. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as a representative of the Russian Federation. We thank Undersecretary General Tom Fletcher and Assistant Secretary General Marta Phoebe. We thank them for their briefings and we welcome the participation in our meeting of the permanent representatives of Sudan and the UAE. Unfortunately, the situation in Sudan remains worrying. The latest surge in tensions is linked to the seizure of control over El Fasher, the capital of North Darfur, by the rebel rapid support forces and affiliated groups. Reports from the area about widespread human rights violations is something that we're deeply concerned by, and the use of violence against civilians, especially when it's done on ethnic grounds, is unacceptable and runs counter to universally recognized norms of international humanitarian law. The atrocities committed by the rebels against the civilian population of the city and the images of this circulating online are shocking. And Sudanese people have already endured similar horrors in El Geneina and El Gezira. After witnessing these events, no member of the Council should have any doubt about the kind of practices could risk being established in areas outside of the control of the Sudanese government. Moreover, with increasing reports of a significant number of foreign fighters among the RSF ranks, including those who come from regions very far removed from Sudan, questions arise about to what extent they're answerable to anyone who can be controlled at all. The situation in El Fasher must serve for all of us as a clear signal that the only viable path for Sudan is reliable stabilization and the establishment of order across the entire country under unified, centralized institutions of governance. Any alternative path is a prologue to a further escalation of a spiral of violence and a return to the era of interethnic conflict in Darfur and its potential spillover into neighboring Chad. The situation in El Fasher has exposed a truly dire humanitarian situation in the western regions of the country. The ability to deliver aid to areas held by the rebels is limited or downright impossible and carry life-threatening risks for humanitarian workers. We noted assessments in this regard from UN humanitarian agencies operating in Sudan, which indicate that it is the RSF that is obstructing the unhindered delivery of assistance to those in need. At the same time, these agencies have confirmed that all necessary permissions and approvals have been obtained by them in a timely manner from Port Sudan. We believe it's important to maintain close coordination with the Sudanese government when it comes to aid distribution, identifying the most urgent needs, and resolving administrative and logistical issues. As we see, the Sudanese authorities are fully open to this cooperation, but they do expect that the UN agencies and their partners will, in good faith and without politicization, carry out their part of the work. In light of the escalation around El Fasher, there are growing calls for concrete actions on the ground to compel the parties toward peace. We believe that such measures would only be effective if they receive support from the Sudanese people themselves and the government that represents their interests, which is led by Prime Minister Kamel Idris. Any steps aimed at equating the conflicting parties or suggesting that neither side has legitimate authority can only be seen as encouraging separatism and internal discord. We urge all Council members to focus on constructive engagement and tangible support for the Sudanese people rather than promoting division. It is precisely guided by this effort that Security Council efforts can help bring peace to Sudan. Russia consistently advocates a peaceful resolution to the prolonged conflict in Sudan, and the priority here must be the preservation of the country's unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. Alongside other responsible members of the international community, we too reject the creation of any parallel structures of power. Achieving the desired normalization is only possible through the cessation of hostilities as soon as possible, launching of a comprehensive political process led by the Sudanese themselves and that reflects solely their national interests. diplomatic efforts to overcome the crisis must be aimed at truly supporting national reconciliation, take into account the positions and approaches of the Sudanese government and all patriotic socio-political forces that enjoy broad political support. I resume my function as President of the Council, and now would like to give the floor to the representative of Sudan.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God, the most gracious, most merciful, Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, at the outset, I'd like to congratulate your country on its assumption of the presidency of the Council this month, and we commend your skillful and able leadership of the Council. Allow me to begin by praying for the souls of the innocents that were brutally killed in Al-Fashir by the Rapid Support Militias, and over the past 2 days, I pray for the injured to be healed and for those forcibly detained by the Rapid Support Militias that you described as barbaric and not being related to any standards of modern civilization. I pray that they return home, those detained. I thank ASG, Madam Martha Poby, ASG for Africa and the Department of Political and Peacekeeping Affairs, and I thank Mr. Tom Fletcher, Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs. I also thank all the members of the Security Council who have condemned this barbarism that is unprecedented. I also thank specifically the representative of Algeria for the statement he delivered on behalf of the A3+ group. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Security Council, I speak to you today to recall that I have, and since 2023, been saying to your esteemed Council that the rebel Rapid Support Militia seeks to turn Darfur and Al-Fashir into a new Tora Bora. Several days ago, the city of Al-Fashir, the capital of North Darfur, has become a new symbol of the human tragedy created by the organized criminality of the terrorist Rapid Support Militia and those who sponsor it, support it, finances it, and furnishes it with weapons, money, foreign mercenaries, and political, diplomatic, and media support. We have explained all of this to you at great length, and we have provided documentation to that end. What is happening in the city of Al-Fashir is not an isolated incident. Rather, it is a continuation of a systematic pattern of killing and ethnic cleansing that this militia has carried out since its rebellion in April 2023. The scenes of genocide witnessed by the world in West Darfur against the Masalit tribe are repeated today in the city of Al-Fashir, where thousands of unarmed civilians are being slaughtered, neighborhoods and markets are set ablaze, medical facilities and hospitals are looted, and those inside them are killed. According to a statement by the World Health Organization, approximately 450 patients and companions were killed in the Saudi hospital in Al-Fashir, which was the last health facility still operating in the city after these criminal militias deliberately destroyed all the health facilities there during the continuous siege and bombardment of the city. The militia has killed civilians and humanitarian workers, as it did in the city of Bara. Women and girls are attacked in broad daylight. What this militia is doing is no longer just a violation of human rights, but a crime, a new crime against humanity, and a genocide by all legal standards and definitions. And in order to understand the magnitude of the disaster, the number of victims in the city of Al-Fashir alone, since the militia entered it a few days ago, that number exceeds the victims of the terrorist attacks of the 11th of February 2003. This is a figure that is enough to shock anyone with a conscience. There are no more civilians in Al-Fashir city. They have either been annihilated by rocket attacks, drones, and chemical weapons used by the rebel militia, or killed while trying to flee the city seeking safety. Mr. President, the government of the Sudan has been alerting this Council and the international community on a regular basis, and since 2023, to the diabolical and criminal nature of this terrorist organization, which is nothing more than a tribal militia led by a single family, much like the mafia. It is the natural extension of the notorious Janjaweed militia that has committed acts that even some members of this Council, and you today agreed on that classified as as an atrocity and genocide. This militia has no legitimacy, be it political, national, or constitutional. It is based on the ideology of ethnic superiority and racism against the African tribes in Darfur and throughout Sudan. Its modus operandi is one of looting and systemic violation of international humanitarian law and human rights laws. This criminal militia derives its strength from the gold it looted from Darfur and smuggled to the markets of its regional sponsor and the external support of that same regional sponsor. However, some international actors have chosen to equate the sovereign Sudanese state with a rebel militia that perpetrates systematic killings. This is a grave moral, political, and legal mistake. What is worse is that this militia documents its crimes in audio and video and broadcasts them to the entire world in blatant defiance of the international community and the Security Council, taking advantage of the state of impunity and the absence of any serious response to deter it or hold it accountable for its crimes, in particular its successive violations of Security Council Resolutions 1591 and 2736, which the Council has failed to implement, thus giving it a green light to continue perpetrating the atrocities that you witnessed yourselves in Al-Fashir. Mr. President, the government of the Sudan has provided this Council and the international community with documented evidence confirming that the militia is using foreign mercenaries from neighboring countries and from countries as far away as Latin America. Their recruitment, financing, and smuggling across the borders to kill Sudanese citizens are carried out under the auspices and supervision of a well-known regional sponsor. However, the Council has not yet taken any practical measures to hold this particular sponsor and others accountable, or to hold accountable the financiers and supporters of these crimes and this terrorism. Nor has the Council established a mission of inquiry to investigate them. The Rapid Support Militia continues its flagrant defiance of Security Council Resolution 2736 by using the weapon of starvation to prevent humanitarian aid from reaching Al-Fashir. It imposed a suffocating siege on the residents of Al-Fashir since May 2023, depriving the residents of food and medicine before carrying out the horrific mass massacre that took place before your own eyes. And this was declared by the militia's leaders in their videos. The militia has besieged the city for more than a year and a half, cutting off supply routes, and then it set upon its inhabitants to carry out a massacre that recalls the most horrific forms of genocide that the world has ever witnessed. And in the face of these realities, the Sudanese people, together with the advocates of a free human conscience, are asking and wondering, where is the Security Council and where are its moral and legal obligations under the Charter of the United Nations? Is it not its duty to stand in the face of those who perpetrate genocide and crimes against humanity as it did in other situations and other locations in the world? And out of our moral and legal responsibility towards our citizen, and despite our limited resources and the scale of the systematic and widespread destruction, the government of Sudan has continued its policy of facilitating humanitarian access to all citizens affected by the war imposed on Sudan. It has taken and is taking operational measures to facilitate the acceleration and delivery of humanitarian aid to those in need by increasing the number of border crossings to 13 crossings. We have also extended the opening of the Adri border crossing until the end of this year, and we have increased the number of airports to 7 airports. In addition, we have given international organizations access to all internal roads between the states for the sake of humanitarian access, and we have exempted all humanitarian imports from international organizations and donor countries from customs, taxes, and other duties, which are estimated at around $2.5 billion. The government has implemented more than 80,500 administrative and technical measures to facilitate humanitarian access at the federal and state levels. This includes issuing entry visas, customs and tax exemptions, and permits for the movement of trucks carrying humanitarian aid, and the renewal and facilitation of the work of humanitarian organizations and other such actions. Mr. President, Mr. Fletcher met with the president and of the Republic and all authorities, as well as the Prime Minister, Dr. Kamal Atayeb Idris, when he visited the country last year when he visited the United Nations here to attend the General Assembly open debate. And the Prime Minister confirmed that he will personally facilitate all of his work. And we regret to hear that there are some obstacles that continue to exist. But what is meant is the request by the World Food Programme Bureau Manager in Sudan and another official to leave Sudan. Then we note that this order was issued after a close observation of some violations that affect the country and affect the reputation of the organization and its tasks as mandated. And after many notifications and warnings have been sent on these violations and transgressions with no response, the Foreign Minister discussed this matter 2 weeks ago with OCHA officials and with the Deputy Executive Director of the World Food Programme. We affirm that the World Food Programme supports the Sudan and that the decision to evict some of those persons who work for the program is no reflection on our relationship with the program. We are determined to facilitate Mr. Fletcher's work in the Sudan. Mr. President, the government of Sudan reaffirms its unwavering commitment to international humanitarian law and the protection of civilians. We are working with the United Nations and its agencies and with the Secretary General's envoy, Al-Amamra, to facilitate the delivery of assistance to all those in need, including in conflict areas. There are no more civilians in the city of Al-Fashir. They have either been exterminated by rocket attacks and drones and chemical weapons used by the rebel militia recently, or killed trying to leave the city in search of safe harbor. The government is also committed to continuing its efforts to achieve a comprehensive and sustainable peace based on a purely Sudanese national solution that rejects tutelage and foreign interference, and adopts dialogue among the people of the country within the framework of respecting Sudan's sovereignty and territorial integrity. It is truly regrettable that the Rapid Support militias committed these atrocities while an official Sudanese delegation led by the Minister of Foreign Affairs was holding consultations in Washington, D.C. with the U.S. administration on ways to end the war and achieve peace. The government of Sudan has cooperated with the Secretary General in all resolutions and in all truces, and the Rapid Support Forces were the ones who perpetrated these violations. This tragic paradox reveals the nature of this group and its supporters, which do not believe in peace, nor in the political process, nor in the Secretary General's appeals. Rather, it feeds on war, chaos, and terrorism. Accordingly, the government of Sudan advised the Distinguished Council to take the following actions: condemn clearly and unequivocally the massacres committed by the Rapid Support militia, its foreign mercenaries, and regional supporters in Al-Fashir and throughout Sudan in clear and strong language, and to demand that the militia exit the city and respect Resolution 2736 issued by your esteemed Council. Designate the Rapid Support Militia as a terrorist organization in accordance with international counterterrorism standards, and criminalize anyone who deals with it or supplies it with weapons, mercenaries, or drones, or sponsorship, and supplies, including radars and advanced weaponry, and permits such supplies to cross these borders. These weapons don't simply come out of the blue. Impose targeted sanctions on anyone who finances arms or provides safe haven to this militia, be they states or individuals, and they are known to you. We call on the Council to launch an investigation into the genocide of the inhabitants of Al-Fashir city to advance accountability. The militia issues daily threats of mass murder. The armed forces have found weapons from Western countries and advanced radars from Niyala, and these will be displayed at a press conference soon. Ensure the full implementation of Security Council Resolutions 2736 and 1591. Witnesses in Darfur have established that some neighboring states participated in the killing of citizens in support of the militia. support the roadmap presented by the government of Sudan to the UN Secretary General and support its current transitional government, which is based on establishing a permanent cessation of hostilities and having the militia disarm and hand over its weapons, so that the Sudanese armed forces are unified under a single national command. This is an important element to curb the proliferation of weapons. Condemn the foreign aircraft that intervened throughout the past week in support of the militia's operations and targeted the positions of the 6th Infantry Division. Internationally banned nerve gas is also being used in and around the city of Al-Fashir, which has obliged the 6th Infantry Division to withdraw in order to protect the lives of its troops. I would like to be clear, there will be no negotiations with this terrorist militia unless it lays down its arms and stops its aggression against the Sudanese people. And this must also include the sponsor state that sponsors these militias. There can be no talk of peace while genocide and mass killing continue. The Sudanese people will not accept dialogue with those who committed the most heinous war crimes and crimes against humanity and genocide against them. The Sudanese people will not agree to include this militia in their governance as some Western countries want. Sudan will resist the international scheme to divide it. It will resist the regional and international parties who sponsor such a scheme. Sudan will rely on the glory of the gun and push them back in exercise of self-defense, as the Mahdi movement did in the past century to defeat colonialism. What is happening now is a neo-colonialism that is being perpetrated through the militia. And this continued silence of the international community in the face of the crimes will not be interpreted as neutrality, but it is a shameful collusion through silence and incitement by inaction. The Sudanese people will not forget who caused those calamities and who ignored their suffering and disposition. Sudan is not asking for mercy because God is the only merciful one. Sudan demands the restoration of the moral standards in which this international organization was founded, so that this council might take a courageous stand that is in line with the principles of the Charter of the United Nations, which prohibit external aggression and protect peoples from genocide. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sudan for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Mr. President, thank you for convening this meeting to bring attention to a crisis of unimaginable scale. I also thank Undersecretary General Fletcher and Assistant Secretary General Poby for their briefings on the horrific situation unfolding in Sudan. For over 900 days, the civil war in Sudan has engulfed the nation, and the suffering of the Sudanese people has deepened by the day. Meanwhile, the situation in Al-Fashir has grown even more dire. The United Arab Emirates condemns the heinous attacks against civilians in Al-Fashir, in blatant violation of international humanitarian law. We call on the RSF to ensure the protection of civilians and humanitarian personnel. We call on the international community to ensure that all perpetrators of atrocities are held to account. With millions of Sudanese caught in the crosshairs of war, we join the international community's demand that both warring parties, the SAF and the RSF, exercise full restraint and cease all targeting of civilians. The warring parties must fully comply with international humanitarian law, including providing humanitarian corridors and safe passage, and allowing and facilitating rapid and unhindered humanitarian aid at scale for all who are bearing the brunt of this war, particularly women, children, and the elderly. At a time when famine is spreading, it is more important than ever that assistance reaches people throughout Sudan and that the UN be allowed to do its job. The UAE commends the leadership of the United States for convening the Quad, which provides a robust platform to end the conflict in Sudan. The UAE reiterates the Quad's call for a humanitarian truce in Sudan to lead immediately to a permanent ceasefire. We must not allow the humanitarian situation to worsen, nor can we allow these atrocities to be overlooked. The perpetrators of these crimes must be held accountable. Mr. President, recent developments have once again revealed an undeniable truth. The path to peace cannot be forged on the battlefield. The unfolding horrors on the ground reaffirm that the only viable solution lies in a genuine transitional process, one that leads to an independent civilian-led government that is not controlled by either of the warring parties, one that leads to a Sudan that is safe for all its people, free from extremism, terrorism, and racially and ethnically motivated violence. We call on the Council to apply pressure on the warring parties and use all its tools to compel them to return to the negotiating table with a genuine commitment to seek peace. Mr. President, the UAE has stood in solidarity with the Sudanese people for decades, and we will continue to do so. Today, we are announcing an additional $100 million to support life-saving humanitarian operations in El Fasher. The UAE will carry on supporting regional and international efforts to achieve a ceasefire and to finally deliver the peace, stability, and security that the Sudanese people are calling for. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United Arab Emirates for his statement. The representative of Sudan has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I would like to warn immediately those who are going to ask for the floor for the statement that I will give them the floor. Just once. Sudan, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, there is no civil war in Sudan. It is a war of aggression launched by the UAE through its regional proxy, the Rapid Support Forces. And it cannot be described as a two-party war. Mr. President, I wonder why the president of a country with blood on its hand from Sudan is allowed to participate and claim that they care for stability. The representative spoke as if Sudan is under the custodianship of the government in Abu Dhabi and is as such ridiculing the innocent victims in Sudan and the displaced persons and the assault against them in Sudan. Mr. President, everyone knows that the Abu Dhabi regime continues to play the worst role in Sudan through equipping the RSF with armament and resources, aiming to continue the war. The RSF works 100% through the direction of the UAE, and The Guardian and other press sources have confirmed this and have revealed the magnitude of the UAE interference and the magnitude of the crimes in El Fasher and in Darfur and Khartoum and other parts of the Sudan. This responsibility and these crimes lay squarely on the shoulders of the UAE, who is the primary responsible party for these violations. Mr. President, there has been close coordination by military experts in Libya and in Abu Dhabi. And as per The Guardian, there have been armed drones that have been previously used in Libya and in Yemen. Also, TV stations in Libya have confirmed that more than 10 military airplanes have been detected on a daily basis, carrying out flights in prelude to an attack against El Fasher. These have enjoyed logistical support in coordination with the increased violence in El Fasher. This reveals the nature of these flights, and we have informed your council previously of this information. This confirms that the lab in the U.S. university has confirmed that between 26th and 28th October, the killing at the Saudi hospital has taken place, and youth commissions in El Fasher have confirmed in Al Fashir the attacks against the patients, and they have been liquidated in atrocious means by the RSF, and doctors and nurses have been abducted. Mr. President, what the United Arab Emirates is doing is not only a blatant violation against the Charter and the resolutions of the Arab League and this Council. How can we accept that such a country speaks of peace in this chamber while it fills the airspace of Sudan with fighter jets? So it is working for a full fragmentation of the Sudan so that it can enjoy our wealth. Mr. President, the armed forces that some are ridiculing has participated in the coalitions in Eritrea and Ethiopia during the Second World War and during World War I as well. Can this entity be replaced with chaotic militias? Sudan has supported the UAE since the establishment of the state. We'll never forget that the UAE was the first to deny that and betray that history. The UAE will remain a symbol of political betrayal and a stain on the conscience. In conclusion, Mr. President, the representative of the UAE, his place is not here, but with militias who commit crimes against the innocent civilians. The people of Sudan will remain committed to their sovereignty and in unity against all external agendas, and no money or weapon will succeed in breaking the will of our great people who have throughout history succeeded in resisting all forms of aggression. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Sudan for his additional statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates for a further statement.
Mr. President, it is an absurdity that one of the warring parties can carry on politicizing this forum by disseminating false and baseless allegations. This is a party that is directly responsible for the devastation of its own country. A party that has a record of obstructing peace efforts and refusing to agree to an immediate ceasefire. A party that has systematically expelled UN officials in a pattern of intimidation and interference in the UN's life-saving work. This week, it declared 2 senior World Food Program officials persona non grata, as famine continues to spread. Last year, the SAF expelled the deputy humanitarian coordinator, and the year before that, they expelled the head of the UN mission in Sudan. The SAF has walked away from the humanitarian truce despite intensive US and Quad efforts and unequivocal UAE support. The current escalation could have been avoided. Mr. President, it's time for polite fictions and diplomatic niceties has passed. In October 2021, the Sudanese armed forces seized power in a coup with their partner at the time, the Rapid Support Forces. They dismantled a fragile democratic transition and betrayed the hopes of an entire nation. Since then, the SAF has sabotaged every credible peace effort. Its intransigence has led to the catastrophe that we are witnessing today. Since April 23, the SAF has followed the same script, bombing homes, schools, hospitals, and markets, and turning hunger into a weapon of war. The SAF punished its own people with terror, with fire, and according to credible reports, with chemical weapons. The SAF has resurrected the same extremism it once unleashed on Darfur. It derailed and dismissed every peace effort. And only a few days ago in Washington, it rejected a proposal for a nationwide ceasefire before discussions even begun. Each time negotiations faltered, the SAF answered with more bombs. Each time diplomacy offered a door, the SAF slammed it shut. The SAF's maximalism, its military-first doctrine, has gained it nothing, only a Sudan in ruins and its people left to starve. And as the horrors in Al-Fashir unfold, the SAF's representatives, in breathtaking cynicism, denounce the consequences of its own war, as if it were not the architect of Sudan's misery. Mr. President, when the SAF walked away from last week's attempt to reach a humanitarian ceasefire, it did so in full knowledge of what would follow. It knew the price would be paid in Sudanese lives. It knew Al-Fashir would burn. It did not care. Let us not forget that this is the same command that waged war on Darfur 20 years ago, the very same command that shelters men indicted for genocide, and that now claims to defend and to mourn the civilians it once sought to destroy. This is truly obscene. For more than 2 years, my country, the United Arab Emirates, regardless of the lies repeated here, has been clear. Both the SAF and the RSF has disqualified themselves from shaping Sudan's future. It is time the international community accepted that truth. No speech delivered in this hall by a representative of one of the warring factions can disguise who they are or what they are. The world must speak with Sudan's civilians, not their tormentors. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United Arab Emirates for his additional statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I now invite council members to informal consultations to continue our discussion on this subject. The meeting is adjourned.